The year was 1992, and the air in the small town of Willow Creek, Georgia, was thick with July heat and quiet expectations. Emily Wallace was just 20 years old, a nursing student at the local community college, raised in a God-fearing, conservative family. Her parents had poured their beliefs into her: purity, obedience, and the dream of marrying someone who'd bring honor to the Wallace name. At first, Thomas Bennett seemed to be exactly that kind of man. He was 6 years older, the only son of the town's most respected pastor. He had charm, a magnetic smile, and an aura of purpose that pulled Emily in. Their relationship moved quickly. What started as small talk after Sunday service turned into late-night drives and whispered promises. And then, not long after Emily's 20th birthday, she found herself staring at a pregnancy test with trembling hands. Thomas hadn't reacted the way she feared, at least not at first. He promised he'd be there. He told her he loved her, that they'd get through it, even if it meant disappointing their families. They planned to keep the baby, or so Emily thought. But plans have a way of falling apart at the worst possible moment. She went into labor 2 weeks early. It was a rainy Monday evening when she was rushed into Willow Creek Memorial Hospital, pain cutting through her like lightning. The delivery room was crowded with nurses, hushed voices, and flashing machines. Emily was exhausted, drenched in sweat, but determined. When the first baby arrived, the nurses gasped. Then came the second, then the third, fourth, and fifth. 5 babies. Quintuplets. Emily couldn't process it all. She drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the commotion around her. But even through the haze, she heard the whispering. Something was wrong. It wasn't the number of babies. It was their color. Each child had a distinctly darker complexion than either Emily or Thomas. Their skin, while beautiful and soft, carried a richness of tone that immediately drew attention. One nurse gently wrapped them in warm blankets, her eyes darting nervously between the infants and Emily. Another nurse whispered to a doctor. Emily, still groggy, didn't understand what the fuss was about until Thomas walked in. He paused just inside the door. His face went pale, then red. His mouth opened, but no words came out for several seconds. Emily looked up at him, smiling weakly, expecting to see joy, or at the very least confusion. But what she saw instead chilled her to the bone. "What is this?" Thomas demanded, his voice sharp. Emily blinked, confused. "They're ours." "Thomas, they're—" "Don't," he snapped. "Don't you lie to me." Emily's heart pounded. "I swear they're yours. I don't know why they—" He took a step back, shaking his head. "I can't believe this. You cheated. You cheated on me, and now you want me to raise someone else's kids." "No." Her voice cracked. "I didn't. I've never— Thomas, I don't know why they look like this, but I didn't cheat." He refused to look at the babies, refused to hold them. He stood there for another beat, the room silent, but pulsing with judgment. Then he turned and walked out. Emily called after him, but he didn't stop. The hospital staff didn't say much, but their expressions said everything. The attending doctor, an older man with graying hair, avoided eye contact. The charge nurse's tone grew clipped. Emily, still recovering from major trauma and overwhelmed by the weight of 5 premature infants, was left to process the abandonment alone. No flowers arrived. No family came. By the next morning, word had already started spreading through town. In a place like Willow Creek, whispers traveled faster than ambulances. Emily was discharged 3 days later. She left the hospital carrying 5 fragile lives in her arms and a silence heavier than any burden she'd ever known. No one helped her to the car. No one congratulated her. The look on a receptionist's face as she printed the paperwork was laced with something Emily couldn't quite name: disgust, pity, or both. At home, her parents wouldn't take her calls. Her best friend, Amanda, who had once promised to be the godmother, never responded to her messages. The Bennetts, Thomas's family, publicly denied any knowledge of Emily. Pastor Bennett even gave a sermon that Sunday titled "The Dangers of Temptation and Falsehood," which the congregation understood perfectly. Emily tried to make sense of everything. The doctors had offered no real explanation. "It's rare, but not impossible," one nurse had said vaguely. "Genetics can be complicated," but none of it added up. She was forced to leave the apartment she had shared with Thomas. The lease was in his name. She applied for housing assistance, but options were limited. No one wanted to rent to a single white woman with 5 mixed-race infants. Eventually, she found an old, run-down duplex on the outskirts of town. The landlord didn't ask questions. He just wanted cash. Those early months were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, formula shortages, and desperation. She named them Marcus, Danielle, Hope, Layla, and Sky. Each name chosen with care, a defiant act of love in the face of abandonment. Emily sold her engagement ring, worth barely $100, to buy their first set of bottles. She pawned her class ring, her laptop, even her grandmother's locket. She gave up everything except the children. Her savings vanished. Her dreams of becoming a nurse faded into survival mode. Everywhere she went, eyes followed. People stared in the grocery store, whispered behind her back at the laundromat. One woman in the park actually asked, "Are you their nanny?" But Emily didn't fight back. She just pushed the stroller forward, one step at a time. Every day was a new battle, but every night she held each child close and whispered, "You are mine. You're loved, no matter what they say." In the stillness of those long nights, as 5 tiny bodies breathed softly around her, Emily would sometimes wonder what exactly had happened that night in the hospital. What Thomas saw, what the world believed. But one thing she knew, she had not lied. Not to him, not to herself, and she would not let the world steal what she had left. The truth, and the children who carried it. The duplex on the outskirts of Willow Creek was old, drafty, and smelled faintly of mildew, no matter how often Emily scrubbed the floors. The windows let in cold in the winter and heat in the summer, and the wiring buzzed like angry bees behind the walls. But it was the only place that would rent to her, and more importantly, it was the only place where no one asked questions. Emily set up 5 cribs in the living room because it was the only space large enough to fit them all. At night, she would sleep on the worn-out couch, surrounded by the gentle rise and fall of 5 tiny chests, the only music in the otherwise heavy silence of the house. She had no partner, no parents, and no one to call at 2 in the morning when one of the babies wouldn't stop crying. There were days she felt like she was walking through the town wearing a scarlet letter, only hers wasn't stitched in a fabric. It was in the shape of 5 brown-skinned babies cradled in her arms. No one ever said anything directly, but the looks were louder than words. The glances at the grocery store, the slow shifts of conversation when she entered the room, the way other mothers would smile politely and then subtly guide their children away. She learned quickly that pity had an expiration date. At first, a few people had brought her frozen casseroles or gently used baby clothes, dropped off at her front door with no names attached. But by the time the babies were 6 months old, even those small acts of charity stopped. People had decided they had done enough. After all, hadn't she brought this on herself? Emily took every job she could find. During the day, she cleaned houses for wealthy families in town. Families who barely looked her in the eye but still paid her just enough to keep the lights on. In the evenings, she worked the late shift at a 24-hour diner off the highway. On weekends, she sewed dresses and blankets for local craft fairs, slowly learning how to mend, alter, and salvage fabric because she couldn't afford anything new. She learned to budget with surgical precision. Every cent was accounted for. Diapers, formula, baby wipes, rent. She didn't buy new clothes for herself. She didn't have time to think about friends, relationships, or even sleep. Her body ached constantly. Her back throbbed from bending over cribs and vacuuming floors. But she kept going. There was no other choice. Once, in a moment of quiet, she tried to return to her parents' house. She stood on their porch holding Marcus in one arm and Hope in the other, while the other 3 babies squirmed in the old double stroller at her feet. Her mother opened the door, just a crack, long enough to look at the children and say, "I'm sorry, Emily. Your father said, we can't be involved in this." Then the door closed. That night, Emily cried until her face was swollen. Not for herself, but for the realization that her children would grow up without grandparents, without cousins or birthday cards or the kind of warm, chaotic holiday gatherings she'd taken for granted as a child. But even that pain hardened into something like resolve. She would be enough. Time passed slowly in Willow Creek, and yet somehow the babies grew faster than she could understand. First words, first steps, first bruises, and first fevers. The milestones came and went with no one to witness them except Emily. Each child began to show signs of a distinct personality. Marcus was quiet and observant, often content to sit in a corner and study how things worked, especially anything with wheels. Danielle had a temper and didn't hesitate to scream when something didn't go her way. Hope was gentler, more affectionate, always humming to herself or singing nonsense melodies as she played. Layla was precise and organized, lining up her toys in perfect rows. And Sky, the smallest, clung to Emily's side and rarely spoke, eyes wide with an alertness that seemed older than her years. Emily talked to them constantly, reading books aloud, pointing at pictures, narrating her actions so they could learn words. She sang lullabies even when her throat ached. She kissed their foreheads every night and whispered the same words. You are loved. You are wanted. You are mine. Still, the outside world refused to let her forget. One afternoon, while shopping at the local grocery store, she overheard two older women in the produce aisle. Shame, really, one said, eyeing Emily with disdain. Used to be such a sweet girl. Now look at her, dragging all those babies around like a traveling circus. The other sniffed. Different fathers, probably. You know how some girls are. Emily didn't react. She didn't confront them. She didn't cry. She simply finished her shopping, walked her children home, and fed them dinner. But later, after they were asleep, she stood at the kitchen sink, hands trembling, water running endlessly, and wondered how long a person could carry shame that wasn't hers to begin with. The town didn't let her forget, and neither did the institutions meant to help. She applied for assistance, only to find her paperwork delayed or lost again and again. Social workers eyed her with suspicion, asking invasive questions, making notes when the children were too quiet or too loud. At one point, there was even an anonymous tip made to Child Protective Services, claiming the children weren't being properly cared for. A surprise visit was made. Emily passed the inspection, but barely. The inspector left with no apology. But in that moment, something changed in Emily. The fear hardened into fire. She stopped asking for help. She stopped expecting mercy. From then on, she worked harder than ever, not just to survive, but to prove everyone wrong. She saved every receipt, documented every doctor's visit, made sure her home was spotless even when her muscles burned with fatigue. She became a mother so capable, so vigilant, that no one could accuse her of anything ever again. And as the children turned 3, Emily knew the only way to make a life in a town that had decided she was nothing was to become more than anyone expected. One morning, as she walked them to the library for story time, someone from her high school passed by. Tracy Miller, now married with 2 kids of her own. Tracy slowed down, looked at the group of 5 toddlers holding hands, and said, "I don't know how you do it." Emily smiled for the first time in a long time. "I do it because I have to," she replied, "and because they deserve it." She kept walking, 5 tiny hands wrapped around her fingers, her chin lifted just a little higher than before. Because in the eyes of her children, she was not a woman to be pitied. She was their whole world. By the time the children were old enough to attend kindergarten, the town of Willow Creek had long decided what it believed about them. The whispers never stopped, only shifted from Emily to her children. Now the stares of the grocery store, the muttered comments in church, and the slow, suspicious smiles at the playground were directed at Marcus, Danielle, Hope, Layla, and Sky. The children, each in their own way, felt it. At home, they were safe. Emily had built their world with love, books, music, routines, and bedtime stories. But outside, the world reminded them daily that they were different. Marcus was the first to notice. He was observant, quiet, and always watching. He liked to take things apart and put them back together, especially toy cars and anything with gears. At school, he kept to himself, afraid to speak up during circle time, afraid of being wrong. His teacher once described him as a little too serious for his age. Danielle was the opposite. Loud, defiant, and passionate, she didn't shrink away from confrontation. She was the one who stood between Marcus and a second-grade bully when he was called a mud baby. She came home that day with a scraped knee and a torn shirt. When Emily asked what had happened, Danielle looked her mother dead in the eye and said, "He said we didn't belong here. So I told him he was wrong." Hope was the peacemaker, always trying to keep her siblings from fighting. She sang constantly, sometimes real songs, sometimes ones she made up. She would sit at the window humming for hours, staring at the clouds, imagining herself somewhere else. She told Emily once, "When I sing, the world can't hurt me." Layla had a sharp mind and sharper instincts. She began counting before she could talk in full sentences. She organized her crayons by color, then by length. She always knew how much milk was left, how many pieces of toast they had, and who had used which fork. She liked order and hated surprises. She started baking with Emily by age 6, using measuring cups with military precision. "I'm going to open my own bakery," she declared one morning, flour on her nose. And Sky was the mystery, the quiet one, the dreamer with the big eyes. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, her voice was soft as breath. She didn't like loud noises, hated being touched by anyone other than Emily, and spent most of her time drawing. She filled notebooks with strange, swirling patterns, faces half hidden in shadows, and skies with 3 suns or none at all. Her teachers called her imaginative and sensitive. Emily called her brilliant. But even brilliance didn't protect them. Every day brought a new reminder that the world did not view them as just kids. They were those kids, the ones with the white mother and brown skin, the ones no one could quite figure out. At school, during Black History Month, they were asked if they felt connected to the lessons. But during school picture day, their hair was a problem. Too curly, too frizzy, too distracting, as one teacher put it. Emily learned to do their hair by watching hours of tutorials online, but she was constantly met with comments like, "You must have your hands full," or "Where did they get their hair from?" At the park, parents pulled their children away, subtly, when the 5 of them approached the swings. At the store, people assumed Emily was the nanny. One woman even leaned down and whispered to Marcus, "Do you know where your real mommy is, sweetie?" Marcus didn't answer. He just took Emily's hand and squeezed it tightly. Emily never cried in front of them. She waited until they were asleep, curled up in the narrow twin beds she had found at a thrift store. Then she would sit at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, and let the weight of it all settle over her. She felt helpless sometimes, helpless to protect them from a world that seemed determined to define them before they could define themselves. But she never let the helplessness win. She taught them to read before the school did. She brought home library books every week, sometimes dozens. She made flashcards, turned math into games, used cooking to teach science, and let them paint on the walls of the hallway as long as they cleaned it afterward. Her house became a place where curiosity was celebrated, where every question deserved an answer, and every answer led to another question. Still, she couldn't shield them from everything. When Marcus was 10, he asked the question Emily had feared since the day they were born. "Mom," he said one evening as they sat folding laundry, "why did our dad leave?" Emily didn't answer immediately. She placed a folded t-shirt on the table and looked at her son. He was growing so fast. His face was longer, his eyes deeper, and there was a tension in his jaw she hadn't seen before. "I don't know all the reasons, baby," she said carefully, "but I know it wasn't because of you." He looked down. "Is it because of our skin?" Emily's chest ached. She reached across the table and took his hand. "No," she whispered. "It's because he didn't understand love the way you do. He didn't know how to be brave. But that's his failure, not yours." Marcus didn't say anything else, but he nodded, and that night, he drew a picture of 5 children holding hands, standing on a hill, with their mother beside them like a giant tree. As the children grew, the questions grew with them. Not just about their father, but about their place in the world. Danielle started challenging her teachers more, asking why history books only showed one version of events. Layla began to track how often her classmates were disciplined and noticed patterns no one else dared mention. Hope wrote poems about belonging. Sky painted a canvas filled with faces that looked like hers, floating in space, neither here nor there. Emily knew that someday they would demand the truth. Not just the gentle, carefully edited version she had offered so far, but the whole, complicated, painful truth. The one she had buried deep inside herself to survive. She wasn't ready for that day, but she could feel it coming. Until then, she poured everything she had into preparing them, not just for tests and school dances, but for a world that would always ask them to explain themselves. And every night, as she turned out the lights and kissed each forehead, she reminded them, "You are not a mistake. You are not a secret. You are not what they call you. You are mine, and you are enough." Emily Wallace had spent the better part of a decade telling herself that love was stronger than truth, that the version of the story she gave her children, the one that left out the darkest corner of her memory, was enough, that honesty could wait, that they didn't need to know everything. Not yet. But the truth, even when buried, has a pulse. And sometimes the past knocks not with fists, but with moments, quiet, unrelenting moments that refuse to be ignored. It was a Tuesday evening when the past came knocking again. Emily had just returned from the dollar store with a bag full of school supplies. The kitchen smelled faintly of overcooked macaroni, and the radio hummed old gospel music in the background. Sky sat at the table, drawing as always, her thin fingers smudged with charcoal. Danielle and Marcus were arguing over a homework assignment, while Hope and Layla were working together on a science project. Emily moved through the kitchen, handing out notebooks, refilling water glasses, her movements practiced and efficient. But when she turned to place a folder in front of Marcus, she noticed something strange. He was staring at her, not with frustration or annoyance, but with something heavier. There was a question in his eyes she'd seen before. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "can I ask you something?" Emily hesitated. She nodded. "Do you remember the day we were born?" She froze. Her fingers still held the edge of the folder. She let it drop to the table, slowly. "Yes," she said. "Of course I do. Do you remember everything about that day?" Emily sat down across from him, her back straight. "Why do you ask?" Marcus glanced toward the others, then leaned in. "Because I've been thinking about it a lot. About why Dad left. About why you never talk about what happened afterward." Emily tried to find the words, but they wouldn't come. Her throat tightened. She reached for her tea, but her hand was shaking. Marcus continued, more gently now. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I've been reading about birth trauma. About what happens when women are left alone during delivery. About how things can go wrong." Emily looked into her son's eyes that held too much for someone so young, and felt the ground shift beneath her. It was time. That night, after the others had gone to bed, Emily sat with Marcus in the living room. The only light came from the corner lamp, casting soft shadows on the walls. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I was 20, she began, "when you were born. When all of you were born. I thought I had someone who loved me. Thomas. He was older, charming, came from a good family. His father was a pastor. Everyone thought we were the perfect match. But when you came out, when the nurses saw your skin, he walked away." Marcus listened without interrupting. He thought I had cheated on him, that I had betrayed him. He didn't wait for explanations. He just left. Emily paused, her hands clenched in her lap. "But that's not all, is it?" Marcus asked quietly. Emily shook her head. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to explain it in a way that makes sense," she said. "I was alone. My body was broken. I had just delivered 5 babies. And then..." She closed her eyes. "There was a doctor," she whispered. "A young intern, maybe. I barely remember his face. I was drifting in and out of consciousness. But I remember his hands. I remember not being able to move. I remember something happening that shouldn't have happened." Marcus's breath caught. "You mean..." "Yes," she said. "I was assaulted. In the hospital. That night." She didn't cry. She had cried all those tears years ago. What she felt now was a deep, aching fatigue. The kind that lived in her bones. "I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? I had just given birth to 5 biracial babies. The town already thought I was a liar. A whore. No one would have believed I was a victim. Did he? Was he? I don't know who he was, she said. I never saw him again. I never told the hospital. I just left, took you all home, and never looked back. Silence stretched between them. Then Marcus said, "Does that mean we're not all from the same father?" Emily nodded slowly. I don't know which of you came from that moment. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to look at any of you and see him. But you never treated us differently, Marcus said, almost in disbelief. Of course not, Emily said, her voice sharp. You are all my children. Every single one of you. You are mine. I chose you. I raised you. I loved you. Marcus looked away, overwhelmed. Emily leaned forward. You asked why I never told you. It's not because I was ashamed. It's because I didn't want that man to take anything else from me. I didn't want him to have a place in our story. I didn't want him to win. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, do the others know? No, Emily said. And I don't know if they ever need to. That's up to you now. He nodded slowly. Then he stood, walked over, and wrapped his arms around her. He hadn't hugged her like that in years. Not since he was little. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to, she whispered. That was the point. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything he'd just learned. His mother had survived something unimaginable, and somehow she had built a life out of the ruins. Somehow, she had never let her pain become their burden. But now that he knew, it was his burden too. The next morning, Emily found a note on the kitchen table. Marcus had written, I'm not angry. I'm proud of you. Thank you for protecting us. She folded the note and put it in the box where she kept their birth bracelets, hospital tags, and the first pictures they ever drew. A box of memories she had carried through every storm. Emily knew the truth was dangerous. It could unravel the story she had fought so hard to hold together. But it could also heal. Maybe not today. Maybe not for all of them. But someday, as she looked at the quiet house around her, she knew that her secret had not destroyed her. It had shaped her. It had taught her how to fight. And now, it was no longer hers alone. It belonged to Marcus. And maybe, one day, to all of them. The years that followed Marcus's discovery passed like pages turning in a heavy book. Life didn't slow down, and neither did the children. If anything, the weight of what he had learned made Marcus more focused. He didn't speak of the secret again, but Emily could see it had changed something in him, deepened him, sharpened his resolve. By the time the quintuplets reached high school, they were no longer just Emily Wallace's kids. They were individuals, carving their own identities in a world that still struggled to accept them. Marcus, now tall and broad-shouldered, had become the kind of young man teachers admired and peers respected but never quite understood. He was quiet, observant, and disciplined. His notebooks were filled with sketches of machines, buildings, and futuristic vehicles. His dream was to become an aerospace engineer. Not because he wanted to leave Earth, he once joked, but because he wanted to prove he could build something that reached beyond the limits set for him. Danielle had grown into a fierce, intelligent teenager with a quick wit and a sharper tongue. She challenged everything: curfews, teachers, rules that didn't make sense. Emily often found herself torn between frustration and admiration when dealing with Danielle's strong will. But underneath the fire was a girl who read legal textbooks in her free time and had already declared she would one day be a civil rights attorney. When she said it, no one doubted her. Hope, as ever, was the emotional heartbeat of the family. She poured her thoughts into music and poetry, singing at school events and writing songs late into the night. She had a gift, something raw and beautiful, and it drew people to her. Teachers said she had an old soul, and her voice, even untrained, had the power to silence an entire auditorium. Hope didn't want fame, though. She wanted to make people feel seen. She said music was how she made sense of the world. Layla remained the most grounded. She ran a small business out of their garage, selling homemade baked goods, hand-decorated planners, and school supplies she customized with vinyl decals and creative lettering. By 16, she had saved over $1,000. She talked about opening a storefront one day, but in the meantime, she balanced schoolwork, business, and being the one everyone turned to when they needed something done right. Sky, still quiet but no longer fragile, lived in color. Her paintings covered the walls of Emily's modest home. Brilliant, chaotic, sometimes unsettling pieces that captured emotions most adults couldn't name. She rarely explained her work, but it was clear she saw the world differently. Her teachers, some intimidated by her intensity, referred her to an art scholarship program that took her to Atlanta on weekends. Sky never liked the city much, but she liked the silence of the studio. There, no one asked her to speak. Her art did the talking. Despite their talents, the town didn't forget. Even with honor rolls, trophies, and newspaper features, they still walked through hallways shadowed by assumptions. Danielle once got pulled into the principal's office for escalating a disagreement with a white student who had called her brother a racial slur. The other student was sent home with a warning. Danielle got 3 days of in-school suspension. When Emily went to the school to challenge it, she was told, "Your daughter is too confrontational. It would serve her well to learn when to walk away." Emily smiled, tight-lipped, and said, "My daughter is learning exactly what she needs to survive." Marcus was overlooked for a STEM scholarship in favor of a less qualified peer. Hope was told her songs were a little too political. Layla's business faced complaints from local vendors who didn't like a child undercutting their prices. And Sky? Sky submitted a painting to a town art fair, an abstract portrait of a mother standing alone in a storm, holding 5 umbrellas over 5 children. It was rejected for being too intense, but none of it stopped them. If anything, the resistance became fuel. Emily watched it all unfold with a complicated heart. She was proud, but also exhausted. Years of fighting subtle wars had taken their toll. She still worked 2 jobs, still kept receipts in a shoebox, still tracked every bill. But she no longer felt like she was surviving. She was watching her children become the kind of people the world didn't expect and sometimes didn't know how to handle. Still, one question lingered, mostly unspoken but present in the air around them. Who were they really? Where had they come from? Marcus had kept Emily's secret, but as they approached their 18th birthday, he began to wonder whether the truth should remain hidden. Not because he didn't believe his mother had done the right thing. For a long time, maybe she had. But because he believed that now, they deserved the full picture. At dinner one evening, as Layla discussed possibly applying for a business incubator in Atlanta, Danielle interrupted with a question that had clearly been bubbling under the surface. "Why haven't we ever tried to find our father?" The room went quiet. Emily set down her fork. "Because he didn't want to be found," she said gently. "He made that clear. But maybe we deserve to know anyway," Hope said softly. Emily looked at each of them. She could feel it, the shift, the moment she'd been dreading and preparing for. They weren't children anymore. They were young adults, carrying pieces of a puzzle she'd always hoped they wouldn't feel the need to solve. "I don't have answers for all of you," she said. "I wish I did." Marcus cleared his throat. "I did DNA test a while back." Emily looked at him, not surprised. "And?" Danielle asked. Marcus hesitated. "3 of us match with Thomas Bennett. 2 don't." There was silence again. But it was different this time, deeper. It wasn't just shock. It was realization. Sky was the first to speak. "Which ones?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "They don't release names in bulk testing without further verification. But if we all do our tests, we'll know." Emily watched her children process the news. Some looked hurt, some confused. Layla looked analytical. Hope looked like she might cry. Danielle looked angry. So someone in this house is the result of something, not love. Emily flinched, but she didn't run from it. "I don't know what to say except this," she said. "It doesn't matter how you got here. It matters that you are here, and that I wanted you. Every single one of you." Her voice cracked. "I didn't choose everything that happened, but I chose you." Over and over. They didn't say much after that. But the next day, all 5 of them ordered their own DNA test kits. Because the truth was coming, whether they were ready or not. And in that truth, they hoped, not just to understand where they came from, but to reclaim it on their own terms. 18 came quickly, like a train no one could stop. One day, they were 5 kids trailing after Emily through grocery store aisles. The next, they were taller than her, packing for college tours, arguing about majors, and filling out scholarship forms. Emily watched from the edges of their busy lives, proud and quietly grieving the end of the era where they had belonged entirely to her. With their DNA test results still pending, the topic of their father hung over the house like a slow-moving storm. No one talked about it after the dinner where Marcus revealed his findings, but remained unspoken, uncomfortable, and deeply present. Hope, as always, chose music to navigate the silence. She had been invited to perform at Willow Creek's annual Unity Celebration, a town-sponsored event held at the local community center. The festival had once been a dull formality of speeches and flags, but in recent years, it had tried to rebrand itself, adding performances, student art displays, food trucks. Hope had submitted a song, an original piece titled Where I Begin. The lyrics were personal, raw, and poignant, an anthem about belonging and identity that she had written late one night after rereading her DNA kit instructions for the third time. It was the first time the town had publicly invited one of the Wallace children to be part of something that wasn't about charity or controversy. Emily, hesitant but supportive, helped Hope pick out a dress. Simple, navy blue, modest but elegant. Hope practiced every night in the living room, her voice rising and falling as her siblings worked around her. Even Sky, who rarely commented on anything, told her quietly, "It sounds like truth." The day of the event arrived with a bright sky and the buzz of anticipation. Emily arrived early, sitting in the front row with Layla and Danielle. Marcus helped the stage crew with setup, while Sky stood off to the side, sketchbook in hand, observing everything. The room slowly filled with townspeople, teachers, church leaders, old neighbors, and classmates. Many of them had watched the children grow up with suspicion or curiosity. Some now applauded them with measured enthusiasm. Others still wore masks of polite indifference. Hope waited backstage, hands trembling. As her name was announced, the lights dimmed slightly, and soft piano chords played through the speakers. She stepped into view, shoulders squared, heart pounding. Emily sat up straight, breath held. The sight of her daughter on that stage, confident, elegant, poised, was almost too much. For a moment, the years collapsed, and Emily saw her not as a performer, but as the baby who once slept curled against her chest, humming before she could talk. Hope stepped up to the microphone and smiled nervously. "This song is about identity," she said, her voice steady, "and about all the questions we ask ourselves before we learn to live with the answers." She nodded to the accompanist, but just before the first note played, a voice rang out from the audience. "Well, maybe start with figuring out who your real daddy is." Laughter broke out from a cluster of older men near the back, 3 or 4 of them, sitting in the folding chairs like it was a show made for them. Their words weren't loud, but they sliced through the room like a whip. Hope froze. The silence was immediate. Emily's heart sank. Danielle stood up halfway, fists clenched. Marcus took a step forward from the side of the stage, jaw tight. Layla reached for Hope with her eyes, willing her to ignore it. But Hope didn't move. Her lips parted, her hands shook, and for a moment, she looked lost, completely, visibly lost. Emily stood. At first it was slow, unsure, like she hadn't quite made the decision. But once she took the first step, the rest came easily. She walked down the aisle, up the short steps to the stage, and crossed to her daughter, placing a hand gently on Hope's shoulder. Hope turned toward her mother, eyes glassy, face pale. Emily turned to the audience. For years, she had stayed quiet. Let them whisper. Let them assume. Let them reduce her and her children to a set of scandalized facts and outdated judgments. But not tonight. She stepped to the microphone. "I've listened to your gossip for almost 2 decades, she began, her voice low. "I heard you at the grocery store. I heard you at PDA meetings. I heard you in line at church." The audience was frozen, no longer amused. "You whispered about me when I was 20 and alone with 5 babies. You whispered about them when they started school. And even now, even here when my daughter is about to sing a song she wrote with her whole heart, you whisper still." Her voice didn't tremble. It rose. "Well, since you're so eager for the truth, let me give it to you." Emily paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I was abandoned in a hospital room by a man who was too ashamed to accept that his children didn't look like him. And yes, I said his children. Because the tests are coming back, and they will prove what I've known all along, that they are his. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a phone. The silence that followed was no longer passive. It was stunned. But even if they weren't, Emily continued, they are still mine. I raised them. I fed them, bathed them, educated them, held them when they cried. I stayed when no one else would. And no matter what blood says, I am their mother. Her gaze turned hard. And if you still think mocking a teenage girl on a stage makes you more of a man than the one who left us, then you are no better than he is. The words fell like a hammer. Emily turned to Hope, who was now visibly crying, but standing taller. She nodded to her daughter, then stepped back. Hope wiped her face. The pianist, sensing the moment, began again. And this time, Hope sang. Her voice trembled at first, then strengthened, then soared. The lyrics, raw, aching true, filled the room. People sat motionless, eyes wide, some blinking back tears. Sky drew furiously in the back, as if trying to capture the sound in color. When the song ended, the room remained quiet for a long beat. Then applause broke, scattered at first, then growing. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. Hope bowed once, then walked off the stage straight into her mother's arms. Emily held her tightly. That night, the headlines were not about the performance itself, but about the moment before. About a mother who stood up and said what no one else had dared to say out loud. About truth. About belonging. And in households across the town, people talked, not all with kindness, but many with something new. Respect. Or perhaps, finally, understanding. For the first time in a long time, the Wallace family had not just endured the town. They had commanded it. The video of Emily's speech spread faster than anyone expected. A local journalist had captured it on her phone and uploaded it to social media with a caption that read, "Mother of 5 defends daughter from racial heckling at town event," and stuns audience with long-buried truth. By the following morning, it had been viewed over 100,000 times. People from across the country, many from small towns just like Willow Creek, flooded the comment section with words of support. Some called Emily brave. Others called her a hero. A few doubted her story, but those voices were quickly drowned out. For once, the narrative wasn't just being shaped by rumor and gossip. It was being rewritten by Emily herself. But while the internet buzzed with admiration, inside the Wallace house, things were far more complicated. The performance had been cathartic, yes. Hope felt empowered. Emily felt relieved, maybe even vindicated. But the truth had been spoken out loud, and that meant it could no longer be contained. Questions that had been quietly pushed aside now returned with sharper edges. The DNA test results arrived 2 days later. Each of the children had registered their kits under pseudonyms, a precaution Marcus insisted on. He had coordinated the testing through a company that offered extended family analysis, allowing siblings to compare results without immediately knowing paternity unless they requested it. Emily sat on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap as each child opened their envelope. Marcus was the first to speak. "Mine matches Thomas Bennett." Danielle looked down at her paper. "Same here." Layla nodded. "Me too." Then came the silence. Hope swallowed hard. "Mine doesn't." Sky didn't say anything. She simply handed her results to Marcus. He read them, then folded the paper. Sky's doesn't match either. No one moved. The room held its breath. Emily looked at her daughters, her heart breaking all over again. "I was hoping it wouldn't matter," she said quietly. "That maybe you wouldn't want to know, or that the results wouldn't be so defined." Hope's voice was thin. "So we're not really all the same?" Emily shook her head, her eyes filling. "You're absolutely the same. You're sisters. You were born together, raised together, loved equally. But we don't have the same father," Sky said softly, more a statement than a question. Emily hesitated. Then she nodded. "No, you don't." Danielle leaned forward, her jaw tight. "So, which one of us?" Marcus cut her off. "It doesn't matter. We said we wouldn't assign blame." "No one's blaming anyone," Layla said quickly, though her voice was tense. "But it does matter. Not because we don't love each other, but because we need to understand where we come from." Hope turned to Emily. "Why didn't you tell us sooner? Before we did this? Before we opened these results?" Emily looked at her daughter, saw the pain in her eyes, and knew there was no easy answer. "Because I was afraid," she said honestly. "Afraid that knowing the truth would change how you saw yourselves, how you saw each other. I thought maybe if I loved you hard enough, it wouldn't matter." "But love doesn't erase reality," Sky whispered. Emily closed her eyes. "No, it doesn't." Hope stood. "Was it him?" Her voice shook. "The man from the hospital?" Emily nodded slowly. Sky's voice was barely audible. "Was it both of us?" "I don't know," Emily said. "I never knew. I never wanted to." They sat in silence for a long time. The weight of facts, names, numbers, bloodlines settled around them like dust. Eventually, Danielle spoke. "I still think you're the best mother in this town," she said. "But that doesn't mean I'm not angry." "You have every right to be," Emily said. "I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to protect you. And now we have to protect each other," Marcus said firmly, "from whatever comes next." Because it was clear that something would come next. The DNA results hadn't just offered answers. They had opened a door to something bigger. Hope, driven by a mix of curiosity and anger, began researching. She contacted the testing company and requested further information. She found out that the DNA of one of the unknown biological fathers, Sky's, it seemed, had been matched in the system to a former medical intern from Willow Creek Memorial Hospital. She brought the information to Emily. "This is him," she said, holding up a printed report. "His name is Jordan Price. He's now a physician in North Carolina. Married. 2 kids. Emily stared at the name. It meant nothing and everything. "I don't want anything from him," she said. "I know," Hope replied. "But I do." Emily looked up sharply. "I'm not looking for a father," Hope continued. "But I need to know if he remembers. If he even knows. I need to know what kind of man he is." Sky, who had been silent the entire time, simply said, "Me too." Emily didn't argue. She didn't plead for them to let it go. She knew better now. The truth had a path of its own, and it was no longer hers to manage. So she gave them her blessing, carefully with limits. "You can write. No visits. No confrontations. No media." Hope agreed. The letter was simple, direct, and signed only with their first names. A week later, they received a response, an official, legal notice from Jordan Price's attorney, stating that their claims were unfounded and defamatory, and that any further contact would result in legal action. Hope cried that night. Sky didn't cry. She just tore up the letter and threw the pieces in the fireplace. Emily held them both, said nothing, because what was there to say? Sometimes the truth doesn't free you. Sometimes it refuses to answer you. And sometimes it tries to shut the door in your face all over again. But it was Marcus who reminded them of what mattered. "You asked where we come from," he said. "But maybe a better question is, who are we now?" And that question, unlike the DNA results, was still theirs to answer. It had been more than 18 years since Thomas Bennett walked out of that hospital room without looking back. In the years that followed, he had disappeared from Willow Creek entirely, swallowed by the shame he refused to name and the guilt he would not acknowledge. Emily had expected never to see him again. She had buried that chapter deep in her mind, turning her focus to diapers, homework, scraped knees, and teenage rebellion. Thomas was a ghost, a name unspoken, a face left behind. The children grew up without him, and for years his absence was a fact rather than a wound. But some ghosts refused to stay dead. It started with a knock at the door. Emily had just returned from the post office when she heard it. A soft, measured knock, polite but unfamiliar. She opened the door and froze. Thomas Bennett stood on her porch. Older now, of course. His once dark hair was streaked with gray. He had lost weight, and his frame looked slightly hunched. But his face, his eyes, were unmistakable. "Emily," he said, voice hoarse. "May I come in?" She didn't move. The silence between them stretched like wire. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he continued. I saw the video, the one from the event, and I thought." "You thought what?" she asked, finally finding her voice. "That I should come." Emily stepped outside and shut the door behind her. She folded her arms. "You don't get to show up now and pretend that time hasn't passed," she said. "You made your choice." "I know," he replied quickly. "I know what I did. I left. I was scared. I was confused. But I didn't come here to justify it." Then why are you here? He hesitated. Because I've been given a diagnosis. Stage 4 prostate cancer. The doctors say it's a matter of months. Maybe less. And before I go, I needed to know if they're really mine. Emily blinked. The old fury surged in her chest. They were always yours, she said. They didn't need a DNA test to prove that. I did. Thomas looked down at his hands. I didn't know how to come back. You didn't try. He nodded. That's true. Emily studied him. The man in front of her was not the same one who had walked away from her hospital bed 18 years ago. He looked broken, not just by illness, but by something deeper. Still, pity was not forgiveness. I don't need your regret, she said. And they don't need your presence. They have lived their lives without you. They've built something strong, something beautiful, and you didn't lift a single finger to help. I know, he said quietly, but I'd like to meet them. Just once. Not to ask for anything. Not to interfere. Just to see. Emily hesitated. Let me be clear, she said. You will not manipulate them. You will not try to insert yourself into their lives. If they agree to meet you, it's on their terms. Not yours. I understand. She didn't trust him, but she also didn't want to make the decision for them. I'll tell them you came, she said. But that's all I'll promise. He nodded. That's fair. He turned to go, then paused. Emily, he said. I'm sorry. For everything. She didn't reply. Later that evening, Emily gathered the children in the living room and told them. Hope looked stunned. Danielle was instantly angry. Marcus was unreadable. Layla asked what stage of cancer it was. Sky just stared at the floor. I didn't invite him in, Emily said. I told him I'd ask you first. Silence settled over the room. Marcus finally spoke. If he's dying, maybe we should let him say what he needs to say. Danielle scoffed. Why? So he can feel better about himself before he dies? He doesn't get that luxury. Maybe we need it more than he does, Hope said quietly. Closure. Answers. Layla added. It's not about forgiving him. It's about choosing how we carry the past. Sky remained quiet. Emily watched her children, amazed again at how they could hold such different pieces of the same story. Finally, Sky looked up. I want to see him, she said softly. Just once. To look in his face. Marcus nodded. Then let's do it. Together. The meeting was arranged in a public library conference room. Neutral ground. No cameras. No media. Just the 6 of them. Thomas sat nervously at the end of the long table, hands folded tightly. When the 5 of them walked in, he stood, visibly shaken. My God, he whispered. You're... He didn't finish the sentence. Danielle remained standing, arms crossed. The others took their seats slowly. I don't expect forgiveness, Thomas began. I came here because I wanted to see what I missed. Why I ran from? Marcus leaned forward. Why did you run? Thomas looked at him. Because I didn't believe what I saw. Because I grew up being told that a child's worth came from their appearance, their lineage, their conformity. And when I saw your skin, I panicked. I thought Emily had betrayed me. I couldn't handle the shame I imagined was coming. Danielle's voice cut through the room. You couldn't handle the shame, but we lived with it. I know, Thomas said, and I am sorry. I don't expect that to mean much, but I mean it. Hope asked, did you ever think about us? Every day, he said, but the longer I waited, the harder it became. And then it just became easier not to think. Layla shook her head. You missed everything. First steps, first words, birthdays. You left it all. I did, Thomas said, and I'll never get that back. Sky, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. You're not our father. You're just a man who left our mother to do it alone. Thomas's lips trembled. Understand, he said. They didn't stay long. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Enough to see him. Enough to say what needed to be said. And when it was over, they left him there, alone in the room. Outside, in the steps of the library, they stood in silence for a long time. Then Marcus said, let's go home. As they walked back to the car, Emily waited for them. She had not gone in. This was their moment, not hers. When they reached her, no words were needed. They had seen the man, heard his voice, measured his apology, and then they had turned away. It wasn't revenge. It was choice. For the first time, they were writing the story, not as children left behind, but as people. After their meeting with Thomas Bennett, the Wallace siblings returned home quieter, not broken, but inward-facing, each of them carrying something they didn't have before. There was no dramatic confrontation, no weeping apology that transformed hearts. What they received from Thomas was exactly what he had to offer, a man at the end of his life, trying too late to make sense of a past he had chosen to run from. But what followed wasn't silence. It was momentum. Emily noticed the shift first in Danielle. She had always been bold, a fighter in every room she entered, but after seeing Thomas, her defiance sharpened into something more focused. She began speaking more often at her school's debate team, took over the leadership of a student coalition focused on racial equity, and started drafting a speech she said she'd one day deliver on a national stage. Hope wrote 3 new songs in a week. One of them, called Inheritance, wasn't angry. It was soft, haunting, a ballad about bloodlines and the spaces between them. When she performed it at a small open mic in Atlanta, someone recorded it and shared the clip online. Within days, it reached a local radio station. A few weeks later, a producer reached out. Hope didn't answer the offer right away. She wasn't sure if she was ready. Marcus doubled down on his engineering internship. He began tutoring other students in his program and proposed a senior project to design affordable housing units using sustainable materials. "It's not enough to build things," he told Emily one night. "You have to build things that matter." Layla's business expanded. She launched a website and started shipping orders out of state. She kept a journal by her bed where she wrote goals, budgets, and quotes from women she admired. One page simply read, "Don't wait for permission to succeed," and sky painted every surface of her bedroom. Walls, door, even the underside of her desk became a canvas. Her work grew bolder, less abstract. One piece showed 5 children walking across a bridge made of torn newspaper clippings, each one representing a label or insult they had outgrown. Above them stood a woman with her arms stretched wide, holding back a storm. Emily didn't ask what it meant. She knew. Then came the interview. A regional public radio show called Voices of the South had been following the family's story since Emily's viral speech. They had reached out multiple times requesting a sit-down, and Emily had always declined. But Danielle, now 18 and legally able to speak for herself, said yes. She didn't tell her siblings until after it was booked. Emily found out the night before the interview, when she overheard Danielle rehearsing her talking points in the kitchen. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Emily asked. Danielle nodded. "It's not about him. It's about us. About telling the story the right way." The studio was modest, tucked between a bank and a coffee shop in downtown Macon. Danielle arrived alone, wearing a blazer she had borrowed from her debate coach. She didn't want backup. She wanted clarity. The host, a calm-voiced woman named Alana Grant, greeted her warmly and offered her tea. "You understand the scope of this interview?" Alana asked before they went live. "We'll be talking about your family, your upbringing, the meeting with your biological father, and your mother's story." Danielle nodded. "I'm ready." The interview aired the following week. It opened with a simple question. What's it like growing up with a story that everyone in your town thinks they already know? Danielle smiled into the microphone. "It's like walking around wearing someone else's name tag," she said. "Everyone thinks they've got you figured out, but they don't even know your real name." She talked about the whispers, the questions, the assumptions. She talked about being 5 shades of skin tone in one family, about the jokes made at lunch tables and the moments of silence when people try to figure out how to ask what they really wanted to ask. "What are you? And how did you get here?" Alana asked about their father. "He left," Danielle said simply, "and for a long time, that was all I knew. Now I know more. I know he was afraid. I know he was weak. But I also know that his absence didn't define us. My mother did. And when you learned about the DNA results?" Alana asked, "That 2 of your siblings had a different biological father." Danielle took a breath. "Blood is facts. Biology is data. But love is choice. And my mother chose all 5 of us. Every day. That matters more to me than DNA ever could." The most powerful moment came at the end. Alana leaned in and asked, "If you could say one thing to the world about your mother, what would it be?" Danielle didn't hesitate. "I'd say she didn't lie to us. She gave us the version of the truth we could survive. And then, when we were strong enough, she gave us the rest." The interview went viral within hours of airing. Major media outlets picked it up. Emily was contacted by publishers, documentary filmmakers, and morning shows. Some offered money. Others wanted exclusivity. She said no to all of them. "I don't want to become a story someone else tells," she told her children. "We've already fought to own this one." But not all responses were kind. Some critics accused Emily of deception, of hiding the truth too long. Others questioned her decision to raise the children without involving their fathers. A few wrote angry op-eds about traditional family values being undermined. Danielle read every single comment. Then she wrote her own. She posted on social media, "Our family doesn't need your permission to exist. We're not broken. We're not confused. We are not less. We are 5 children raised by one woman who never stopped choosing us. And that's more than some people get in a lifetime." That post was shared over 500,000 times. Emily, reading it from the kitchen table with tears in her eyes, realized something. Her children were not just surviving anymore. They were shaping the narrative. Not as victims, not as mysteries, but as voices. Clear, proud, and impossible to ignore. The year Emily Wallace turned 50, the air in Willow Creek felt different. The town hadn't changed much, not in the way people imagined change, with big signs and new buildings. The diners still served watery coffee, the church bells still rang every Sunday, and most people still walked the same routes to the same jobs. But the silence had changed. The way people looked at her family had changed. And the way her children carried themselves, openly, boldly, unapologetically, was a testament to that shift. Emily didn't seek attention. She never had. But the world had found her anyway. And now, in the wake of the interview, the online support, and the thousands of letters from women across the country who saw something of themselves in her story, she found herself reflecting not on the noise, but on the quiet moments that had built her life. She thought about the night Marcus was up all night with a fever, and she had stayed awake whispering stories until sunrise. She remembered Layla's first dollar from her school bake sale, the way Danielle once defended hope against a teacher's offhand remark, and the time Sky drew a mural on the back fence without asking, and Emily hadn't been mad, only moved. Those were the moments no one saw, the ones that didn't make headlines. In those final months of peace, Emily allowed herself to rest. Not fully, never fully, but more than before. The children had grown. They had become people she admired, not just because they were hers, but because they had carved out their identities in a world that had tried to flatten them. Then, quietly and without warning, Emily's health began to fail. It started with fatigue, a cough that lingered, some weight loss she chalked up to stress. But after weeks of persistent symptoms, Marcus insisted on taking her to the doctor. The diagnosis was swift and brutal, an aggressive form of lung cancer, already in its late stages. Emily didn't cry, not in front of the doctor, not in front of her children. She listened. She asked questions. She nodded. Then she went home and sat on her back porch, alone for the first time in weeks. When the children found out, each of them reacted in their own way. Marcus became the organizer, calling specialists, researching treatments, setting up a care schedule. Danielle took on the legal side, updating documents, making sure everything was in order. Hope refused to believe it first. "You're still so strong," she kept saying. "You've beaten everything else." Layla responded with routines. She cooked, cleaned, and checked vitals like a nurse. Sky painted even more than usual, filling canvas after canvas with color and silence. Emily, for her part, focused on preparing, not just herself, but them. She didn't want a dramatic goodbye. She didn't want long speeches. She wanted to leave knowing they would be all right. She wrote them each a letter. To Marcus, she wrote, "You were never just the eldest. You were my steadiness, my bridge, my quiet strength. Let yourself rest, too." To Danielle, "Use your voice, but don't forget your heart. Justice without compassion becomes cold. You've always had both. Keep them close." To Hope, "The world needs your music, but you need your own joy even more. Don't confuse your pain with your power. One is fuel, the other is fire." To Layla, "Structure can keep you safe, but don't let it cage you. You've already built so much, now learn to dance inside it." And to Sky, "You see what others miss. Keep seeing. Keep creating. But remember, you don't have to carry silence alone. Her final letter, addressed simply to all of you, she placed in the top drawer of her bedside table. It began. I never knew if I was doing it right. I only knew I had to keep going. Not because I was brave, but because you were watching. And now you are the ones who keep going. Not because I am gone, but because you are still here. Emily passed away on a Tuesday morning, just before sunrise. She had spent her last night listening to Hope hum by her bedside, her hand wrapped gently around skies. Her last words were not dramatic. She simply said, "I'm proud," and then closed her eyes. The funeral was small by design, but people came anyway. Old classmates, former teachers, neighbors who had once looked at her with judgment now stood silently in the back, hats in hands, eyes lowered. The 5 siblings sat in the front row, dressed not in black, but in deep shades of blue, purple, and gold, colors Emily loved. Danielle delivered the eulogy, but they each spoke. No one mentioned Thomas Bennett. No one needed to. The headstone, plain and smooth, bore only a single line beneath her name. She gave everything and never asked for it back. After the service, they returned to the house that had once felt too small, but now felt impossibly large. They didn't talk much that day. They cooked, cleaned, sat together in the quiet. That evening, Marcus found the final letter. They read it aloud, taking turns. When they reached the end, there was a pause. Then Hope stood, walked to the piano, and began playing the melody of Inheritance. The others joined in, some singing, some just sitting listening. It wasn't planned. It just happened. And in that moment, their grief was not a burden, but a bond. A few weeks later, a documentary filmmaker approached them again. This time they said yes, but only under one condition. Emily's voice would be central. Her letters, her words. The film, titled The Children She Raised Alone, premiered at a regional festival. It won awards. More importantly, it sparked conversations about race, motherhood, survival, and the complex forms that family takes. Viewers across the country saw themselves in it. Some cried. Others reached out. Women wrote letters. Men confessed regrets. Teachers changed their language. Young mothers in shelters wrote to say, "I feel less alone." The legacy of Emily Wallace did not lie in the tragedy she endured, but in the strength she passed on. A strength that taught 5 children how to stand in a world that hadn't made room for them, and how to build something anyway. Years later, a mural was painted on the side of the Willow Creek Public Library. It showed a woman standing with 5 children, her arms stretched wide across a sky full of storm clouds. Above them were the words from Emily's final letter. "You were born into judgment, but raised in love." And that made all the difference.